Hello, adventurers, and welcome to Cast Friendship. My name is Shubham Mehta, and my guest today is Mike Myler. He's an award winning writer and game designer with over 8 years in the industry, 4 years at Insider, and has written over 200 character stat blocks, four full campaign settings from Hypercore's 2099, which brings Cyberpunk to Pathfinder First Edition, to Vast Kavya, which is the 5e setting if you want savage adventures in the style of Conan, Tarzan, and Beowulf. He's also the manager for Level Up Advanced 5th Edition, which is now on Backerkit. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Yes.
Yeah.
I had a question. So before we get into like the whole process of writing campaign settings and even creating interesting stat blocks, I just wanted to know what got you into TTRPGs? Because for everyone, there's a different buy-in. Sure, maybe it's the role play or just kind of coming up, getting to be someone cool. What was your buy-in? What hooked you into TTRPGs?
Well, the first time I actually played, I was like 9 years old, and my sister's friends were doing it, and I didn't really understand what's going on. And then when I got older, my best friend's older brother was like a big D&D player. He worked at Borders. He had like a bunch of books, most of which he stole from Borders. That were all D&D books, and we convinced him to run a game for us, and then that like grew into a 7-person game, and it went on for like 4 years, and we played both sides, like we were the villains in here. It was insane. Chris did an awesome job. I've hired him to work on stuff since I started working in the industry. But yeah, that's what really got me. And the drive for me was it's like this was back in like oh, good lord, I don't want to date myself. Uh, this is like 2 decades ago. So there, what was the best sandbox game 2 decades ago? Grand Theft Auto 3, I think, dropped pretty recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the draw for me was just like, here's this game you can play where you can do anything. You know, like if you think of it, you can probably do it. And that was that just having that kind of like that kind of freedom was crazy for me. And like now I'm more driven by like the whole experience, because like I'm never gonna get another time where it's like every week we show up and we play for like 13 hours until 4 in the morning. That's not gonna happen anymore. We're all adults. But like, yeah, I'm trying to grasp that feeling, because that was the good stuff.
Do you think that that's then what kind of is the one of the many things that you want to capture in a campaign setting is this giving the tool set that allows you to other players to recapture that sense of like, hey, I can be anything in this world. Is that where it goes?
Yeah, most of the stuff I mean, like, it's about telling different campaign settings are set up to tell different kinds of stories. But yeah, like you just fill that toolbox with like all the different necessary items that you'll need for, if you're trying to do like a wuxia thing where, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, like put in feats and class archetypes that support it. Don't make the players and GM have to like work to figure out how to do it within the framework of the rules if it's not already possible, or if it's complicated to do it that way. Just present to them what you want them to be using.
Can you then talk me through, because you have so many campaign settings, so can you tell me what each one tries to capture, and that way I guess everyone also will be introduced to a bunch of really cool campaign settings.
Sure. So I have philosophy of design behind campaign settings, and it's basically, it boils down to a North Star. It's not like a literal North Star. It's a word, maybe 2 words. Usually, I really push for 1 word that you can apply to anything out of your campaign setting, whether it's a map, an illustration, character stat block, a piece of lore, whatever. As long as your North Star resonates with that, then like you have made a thematically cohesive book, right? So Varanthia Codex, our North Star was radical. Like anything, no matter what you look at, you're like, actually, yeah, here we go. This is a really old, cheap, shitty like print thing, but like every single one of these things was a custom illustration for Varanthia Codex, and each one you're like, oh, that's radical, right? Like, and Hypercore 29, it's all about hyper, obviously. Survival for 29 Wasteland. Vast Cavia, the North Star was vast, because and Book of Exalted Darkness, we actually had 2. It was Holy and Heresy, because that's a book about
the dynamics, the duality, rather.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, it's all about duality. Yeah.
Right. Tell me. Okay, so sure, you get. Tell me a bit more first of all what hyper means, because hyper for me sounds like hyper energetic, But is that where you were going with the hypercops?
Sort of. So the way the Hypercore works is that it has a system in it called Hyperscore.
Right.
Hyperscore is like the drug-addled brother of the Mythic rule set.
Okay.
So you are more powerful, but you're not like super invincible durable. You're definitely still as like easy to kill as usual, but you hit a lot harder, you hit a lot more accurately, you move a lot faster.
Right.
You might have some more defenses to your hands, but your skill bonuses don't really go up. Your hit points probably don't really go up unless you like select the brute type superpowers like the Hulk or the
Right.
Thing. So what you end up getting is a much more punchy, dramatic game with Pathfinder 1E. It kind of works for there's a 5th edition conversion for Hypercore 2, but like it doesn't work quite as well as the Pathfinder version because we made it specifically for Pathfinder and then we converted it over.
Right.
So yeah, it's like a more visceral, hyper version of Pathfinder. It's like these specific attributes like punchy, high numbers, like spectacular stuff, but like not Mythic, it's just everything's like kind of up there. I don't feel like Mythic feels hyper. Mythic feels Mythic,
Right.
because like you're undying and like killing a Mythic thing is so absurdly hard. Um, and yeah, like it doesn't feel like a high octane type experience, which Hypercore 2099 definitely feels like when you're playing for Pathfinder First Edition.
I know you talked about how there's the Wasteland Edition, which kind of is a homage to Fallout. Is there other instances where, and I think you might have even talked about this before, but how you look at a piece of media, whether it's a game or a book or a film, and then you're like, I want a campaign. Is that how some of these work? Or is that even a good way to approach it?
Um, So I don't know if I'd want to do a whole campaign setting like that because like campaign setting is I mean you could do it smaller, but for the especially for me, I like big meaty books. Like it's a big endeavor for me to go and make campaign setting. So to just like pick one thing that I really like and copy it wouldn't really fit. Hypercore 29 is actually probably the closest to that because like it's obviously uh Marvel 2099, right? You remember Spider-Man
Yeah,
2099,
yeah,
Punisher
yeah,
2099. Right, right, right. I love that shit.
yeah,
Doctor Doom 2099 was one of
yeah,
the best run of comics in history. So like there's obviously that's going on, but it's also D&D stuff, right? Like it's a fantasy world, there are dragons, there's robo dragons, there's sorcerers, and there's also like a hyper corporate fascist thing going on. So yeah, but that said, it's also my smallest campaign setting book. It's like 200 some pages. Everything else is 300, 400 pages.
right.
If I was going to do a specific tiny homage, I kind of did for To Stake a Vampire. It's based into To Stake a Vampire. It's very like classic-y horror stuff, but I snuck in all of the weapons from the Marcus Brothers. If you remember Vampire Energy Bloodlust,
I
the vampire
don't.
hunters from that.
Uh,
Oh, Vampire Energy Bloodlust is so good. You can find it on YouTube. Strongly recommend. It's really
okay,
good. Um, and yeah, all the vampire hunters have like really cool like special weapons. Like the guy's got like this weird wrist bow thing, so you
right.
can get one of those in the adventure. This other dude's got this crazy maul, cross star knives. Yeah, yeah. So like yeah, in an adventure, it's a lot easier to do that because it's smaller. It's like 70 pages or something like that. It's not
Right.
I'm not spending months and months and months and months doing that. I'm spending maybe a month, maybe a couple weeks.
Looking at the amount of work it takes to make a campaign setting, can you first can you walk me through the process? Like you said, you determine a north star, and then like let's what's the next step? How do we? What's the overview of putting a campaign setting together?
Sure. I mean, there's no wrong way to do it. Start there. Like a lot of different things, there's a lot of ways to go about it. Generally, my process is I get like an idea. Like for instance, Mr. Fukuma, I was like, okay, well, um, who are unfamiliar with the history of Japan? It's really interesting. There's this period called the Tokugawa isolation, where for a couple of hundred years, the ruling emperor was like, no foreigners. We'll trade with the Dutch, and that is it. You're not Dutch. Don't talk to us. Don't come to our land. Nothing. And it did a lot of weird things. And then in like 1854, I think is Commodore Matthew Perry or something like that, sails into Edo, which is Tokyo, and points like all of their steel-hulled gunboats like at the city and like you're gonna open for trade, and that started the Meiji Restoration. And I was sitting here one night, I was like, man, I was working on Hypercore 29.9 stuff. Like what if Japan was like able to like fight back against steel gunboats in 1854? And that started this process where I was like, okay, well, let's say they have magic. Okay, well, maybe they could. Well, then what would these other like invaders require to get over the magic? Okay, well, what if they like need lightning guns? Okay, well, why do they need lightning guns? Blah, 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 blah. And then I built it up like, oh, okay, so like here's the basic premise. These foreigners are invading this country. So what do we do with it? And then I got my team together, which was Luis Loza's Savannah Broadway and Michael McCarthy. And from there, we worked out a framework. We're like, okay, well, first of all, none of us are Asian people, so we need to figure out how that's gonna work. So we decided very early that we opened the book with this history and like explain like, hey, here are all these foreigners changing this world, sort of like a meta thing, like, hey, we're a bunch of foreigners changing this world. And after we get like that basic premise down and we do like a good brainstorming session, which is what I was referring to, then I will like take that framework that we talked about and I'll create like a skeleton and most of the main copy, like the words in various chapters. And then I'll bring other people back in to work on it and like develop and improve and add to that. For Miss Fukuma, mostly that was Savannah did spells and then she had a couple prefectures. Michael McCarthy did, I want to say he worked on monsters and then a couple of prefectures, and Luis Loza, I think, did feats and a couple of prefectures. And then, like, yeah, I'm everywhere else. And every other book I've done is like that. Depending on the size of the book and the project, like Vast Cavia, we had 2 dozen contributors, but they were almost all only inside of like 3 or 4 chapters. And they had templates for what they were supposed to do. So it's like, this is what a warlord entry looks like. We need to have 4 NPCs. You need to have this stuff. You need to have a header that refers to like the different elements so we know how a warlord interacts with another warlord. Go at it. And yeah, yeah. So for me, it's about establishing the idea, brainstorming, developing the idea, creating a framework and structure around that brainstorming, getting other people in there to help me put all the meat on the skeleton, and then putting all the skin and the hair and the final touches and this creepy stitched up metaphor of making a campaign in a book. Yeah.
How long does this normally take?
Oh golly. Granthia took us the better part of a
That's
year.
also a massive book. It's one of your
It
first
is
ones.
math. Yeah. And it's really like 4 campaign settings in 1 campaign setting. But and yeah, that was a lot of people. And then Miss Fukuma, first draft of Miss Fukuma probably took us maybe 7. No, because I started working on it while I was Hypercore. I would say about a year. That seems like a fair thing for me to say. Yeah, like about a year.
About a year. Got it.
And that's me doing this full time and spending at least half of my time working on that project, right? So half a year full time.
Half a year full time. Okay, but I think also these terms, full time, mean different things in different parts of the world. So, what does full time mean for you? How many hours are we talking?
Well, for the first better half of my career, it was like 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week. Um, very few holidays,
Yeah.
no vacations, just like nonstop, powered by cigarettes and anxiety.
Mm.
Lately, I have tried to practice a healthier, try to have any kind of balance, and I usually take like a day or half a day off every week, and then most days are like 10 to 12 hours. But and I've been taking more vacations, which I strongly recommend if you're able to do, even if it's just putting your phone in a drawer for a
Mm.
day.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, take some time for yourself. It's very important.
right. Um, Having come this far and done all these different roles, because you've gone designer, writer, editor, project manager, which one of these
Everything but Illustrator.
everything but
Everything but
illustrator,
Illustrator.
which I've noted, yes. What is a hat you particularly like wearing, and one that was probably the hardest to kind of get used to
Hmm. That's a good question. I'm really good at wearing the editor hat, but I don't particularly like it, and it
wearing?
wasn't very hard for me to put on. Although it's a little weird. I've had to edit like Ed Greenwood, and it's like, okay, so
Mhm.
this guy is like basically the Jesus of the industry. So
Yeah,
like, how
yeah,
do I tell him that what he wrote is way too salacious?
right, right.
It went fine. He was very cool. But like,
Yeah.
I sat there for a good half an hour, like
Like,
rewriting the email, like, Mr. Greenwood, Ed, dear Ed, I gotta talk to you. Like, it's just over
yeah.
and over and over.
Right.
Um, my favorite one to wear is probably actually the art director hat, because I like getting people to illustrate stuff, because I just can't illustrate. I've tried a lot. I'm no
Right.
good at it.
Yeah.
So getting people to like visualize shit, like this is one of the first things I had illustrated. Do you know what this is? Can you tell from the picture?
I can vaguely tell what the person looks like, but no, I don't know what this is.
This is a number of trolls. Oh, it's all dusty, and it's old. It's an old print. It's a number of trolls, all like in torture devices, on the top
Hmm.
of an icy mountain, and there's like blood running out of their torture
Right.
devices,
Right.
creating a logically consistent river of blood.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And so
That's
like I can't draw that. I'm
right.
well aware I don't have the skills to do that, but I can pay somebody to draw that.
Right.
And then it exists.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my favorite hat to put on.
Right.
The one that's hardest to put on is probably the project manager one, because when you put that hat on, you pull off other hats and it
Mhm.
sucks.
Mhm.
As I mean, it's good when you have good people that you trust and you've got
Mhm.
a good system and everything. It's all worked out. But when you're not sure of everybody, when you're not super confident, putting on the project manager hat is dangerous, because you're like, do I need to pull this other hat on soon to cover for this person because I didn't know that they were flaking on me or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So yeah.
Tell me, because that also means you've worked with a lot of people. What are some traits that one should always kind of try to bring to, especially writing TTRPG content, that you would always look out for, right? Like, sure, of course, you need to have an imagined in mind. I feel like that would be probably a staple, right? But what are some other traits that are, hey, you as a project manager, you're like, okay, you that I like. Let's make sure I rather have that and then compensate for the other things. What's something like
Follow directions.
that? Okay.
Number one, follow directions. This is two is part of one, but two, meet your deadlines. And three, and this is so important, communicate, right? So, like, if you follow all the directions, you don't need to worry about two or three.
Mm.
If you don't follow all the directions and you're late on your deadline, that is also not the end of the world, as long as you do the third one. You communicate with me and you tell
Mm.
me, like, hey, Mike, I need 2 extra weeks, whatever. Because then, like, if I can't give you 2 weeks, then I have time where I can get another designer to jump in and pick it up, or I can, like, schedule out time for myself to do it. But yeah, if you don't communicate with me and you don't hit your deadline and you don't follow your guidelines, you are not just like worthless, you're a problem. Like, you are a detriment to the project or whatever we're working on. Like, you're a
Right.
serious problem. So like, yeah, always follow the guidelines as well as you can. Hit your deadlines and communicate, because like most people be happy to explain to you like whatever it is you're not grokking. So, but you got to tell people, you got to let them know.
Right.
And if you're like really struggling, don't sit there in a well of despair being like, oh, like ask your project manager or another colleague. Be like, hey, I wasn't getting this. What about this is not clicking?
Mm.
Yeah.
Tell me this. When you say follow guidelines, what kind of guidelines are usually given when say, if, for example, I understand that there's a chapter breakdown, and for example, a warlord needs three or four NPCs to go along with. But what amount of freedom do I have within that? Is it all just cook up whatever you want as long as it meets that North Star, or is it even more like specific things?
Usually, usually you're going to be given a word count.
Right.
So it's like you have this many words, and a lot of people think like, oh, well, I'm supposed to turn 2,000 words, but like I'm going to give them 3,000. They're going to be like, sweet.
Yeah.
It's not what I'm going to be like, man,
Yeah.
because I didn't schedule time to edit 3,000 words. I
Yeah.
didn't schedule the book out to accommodate your extra 1,000 words, which, by the way, could be between 1.5 to 2 pages, depending on how the layout guy does it. There's metrics you're maybe not aware of. So, like, when you are commissioned for this thing and it says, 2,000 words on these characters, it needs to be 2,000 words on those characters, or it just might be useless to the person you're handing it to. So yeah, I mean, like, make sure that you're following all the directions, including using their style guide, which will save the editor a lot of time. And you're like, well, the editor's job is to make my stuff look right. And like, that's true. That's true. But the more time I spend doing stupid crap like adding italics and bold, or fixing your use of their prepositions
Mm.
or conjugations rather, whatever. When I'm doing stupid crap, I'm not like looking for ways to make your words better.
Mm.
So if I have the same person turn over the same different assignments from I have the same person write two different things for an assignment, and one of them is really sloppy, and one of them is really clean. The clean one is going to get improved, and the sloppy one's just going to be made clean.
Right.
So yeah, follow the style guide too. If they give you a style guide, and if they don't give you a style guide, ask them. They probably will have some notion about how they want the copy, the text document to look when you turn it in.
Um, that's that's actually very enlightening, and I feel like will be very useful for me and for others who will be getting into this. Hopefully, as they go for more and more deeper into this world of writing. Um, I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
your editor's job is to make you look fly as hell.
Yeah,
So like make their job easy, and
easier.
you will look fly as hell.
Right. What's a so? What is a mechanic that you came up with? And I know we've spoken about this before. That you were like, hey, this was made me feel fly as hell to kind of come up with this.
Yeah. So when we started doing thematic ability scores in Hypercore 2099, in that one it's luck and reputation. And then in the Wasteland, it's radiation and reputation. In Book of Exalted Darkness, it's sanctity and sin. In Vast Cavia, I think it's just mana. But yeah, and they're basically these what I call them thematic ability scores, and they serve a couple purposes. But like for instance, Hypercore 29, and a lot of times because as you move away from standard medieval fantasy, stuff gets more complicated. And it's like, well, I mean, now that we have this world where there's like you're in a city with like a million people. I can't predict every single thing about that. Even if I have lived in New York my whole life, et cetera, it's just not going to work out. But I can give you a luck score,
Mm.
and you can roll me a luck check to tell me if around the alleyway there happens to be a wandering police officer or something like that.
Right.
And it like reinforces to you, the player, that luck is a very important thing in this thing that we're doing. It's so important. It's right up there with strength and dexterity and constitution on the ability scores that you're using for everything else. So it like that's the theme part of it, right? It inserts the theme right into the front of the character sheet, and the players have it in their mind, like, oh, sanctity and sin. That's right. We're playing Book of Darkness. I don't. Am I being appropriately evil? Do
Mm.
people think that I'm looking holy enough? Like that's in their heads while they're playing because I'm
Right.
forcing them to look at it on their
Yeah.
sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I have a question here. Um, so on one side, I totally see the appeal of there being more mechanics and ability scores to play with because, like you said, they solidify an aspect of the game and experience that you need represented. But there's also, and I at least I see this online a lot. This kind of argument, or I hate to say the word discourse because Twitter's not really discourse. Around how most D20 based systems like Pathfinder and D&D are not good for stories. They're good for mechanic led experiences, which in part feels true. But I'm wondering, like, how do you respond to that? Because you're clearly also trying to elevate the story experience by using these mechanics, right? So
So
there's
there's a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
there's a couple axes to this, right? D&D and Pathfinder are resource based games.
mm,
We can say that, especially in Pathfinder, that every encounter we expect you to lose about 33% of your resources. You should have at least 3 encounters a day. And that holds less water for 5e, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But so yeah, it's a resource-based game, whereas and in a resource-based game, obviously the resource is important.
yeah,
And these are resources, right? You have hit points, you have spell slots, you have uses of daily traits and stuff like that. By long rest uses of traits, short rest uses of traits, etc., etc., etc. And these are all predicated to like give the GM an idea of how far you can go each day before the story needs to change, etc. Um, in there's two like very large polar opposites after we get out of the resource talk, right? Because like you can have resource based games, you can have narrative based games, you can have a lot of different based games, but like after we stop talking about that, there's the general principles of design, simulation and narrative. D&D 5e is like this much simulation and this much, or this much narrative maybe, and then Pathfinder it's like this much simulation and this much narrative. And it's because, and this is the scale, so like more simulation, and that's because of like the way the system is designed. 5e has a lot of like narrative freeform to it. It's
mm,
presented as simply, I think, as they could possibly present it.
mm,
If you look at the wizard class, for instance, there's almost nothing to it.
yeah,
It's like you're a wizard
yeah.
and you get like 4 features and
Magic,
you have
go for
access
it,
to most of the spells. Yeah, that's it. You're done.
go crazy.
In Pathfinder, It's much more specific. There's so much more customization, and part of that is because Pathfinder's system is just much stronger. Like the numbers and everything, that all the crunching that has gone on into the Pathfinder system is over 20 years at this point, because it's based off of 3.0.
Right.
And the best example of this is in the challenge rating encounters table, right? So in 5e, there's a page in the DMG. I think on page 274, there's a chart that
Right.
tells you how to like calculate monster CR.
I'm just going to
And it's
clap
pretty
for
much
you knowing
useless.
the page number. Well done. Go on.
Yeah, man. I mean, like it's my job.
Yeah.
And like I have to use it, but it angers me because it's pointless, because it doesn't really work. And you can see that it doesn't work if you go to the Blog of Holdings website. If you look up Blog of Holding Monster Manual, a named Paul Hughes, he's great. He literally reverse engineered the monster manual trying to use their chart, and none of it works. They don't even follow it themselves. WotC has their own internal tools that they give to the freelancers and their house people to make monsters. So there's that end of it, right? And then with Pathfinder, making a monster is incredible. Incredible. You just pick a type of creature and the CR, and it's like, here's what its attack bonus has to be. Here's what its saving throw in this needs to be. Here's this, here's that. Here's the skill DC. Here's the saving throws DC. Everything about it is codified. And this is where the break happens, right? Because like Paizo's basic model of business is, we have a subscription service because we started as Dungeon Magazine years and years ago, and we need you to buy stuff from us every month. It's going to be this adventure where every year we're going to release 2 adventure paths or something like that. I think it's 2, and you can play them in organized play, which we strongly support. We have an in-house staff of like 6 people whose whole job is running organized play. That only works because Pathfinder is a very heavy simulation game. If I am writing adventure for Pathfinder, I have a very, very, very good idea of how many resources the party is going to have at like halfway through their 6th day into the adventure. With 5e, it's swinging all over the place because they don't have that highly codified CR system, right? So like where one party is versus another party in the same adventure could be totally different, and the space between them is going to be a massive gulf, whereas in Pathfinder it's going to be like this. So yeah, you have more control over the game itself with the higher level of simulation, whereas the players have a greater amount of control over the game itself with a higher level of narrative.
Right, and I think that's possibly why a lot of people, at least the newcomers, are drawn more towards PBTA systems, because that's super narrative focused and very few aspects of simulation right there. That actually also explains one of the frustrations I feel as a dungeon master, because when I'm running a game and I go, well, this was supposed to feel challenging and you have way too many resources, and I don't know how to whittle away at them without just making it feel grindy. And that's because 5e hasn't given me the right tools to kind of estimate what will actually do. Because I've done like instances where it's a CR10 creature going up against this party of CR7s. It should be a dangerous, deadly battle. 3 rounds in, they've already defeated it. It's nobody's problem. But then I throw 5 goblins at them, and suddenly, I don't know, a few of them roll nat 20, and like everyone's dying. I had a wizard who they were just a small tangent.
So that's
yeah.
part of the problem with 5e's design, right? Because
Right.
they want to keep it simple and they keep all the numbers low, and they put in these artificial ceilings.
Right.
And what that ends up creating is like mobs are incredibly deadly. Like I would rather be a 10th level fighter against like something the same, like another 12th level fighter,
Right.
than against like 10 goblins, because 10 goblins will fucking eat my life
Right.
as a 10th level fighter.
Right.
Just because the advantage in numbers is so
Yeah.
crazy, because
Yeah.
like all of the artificial capping on your totals.
Right. No, definitely. Like what's crazy is my party was on the way to fight a black dragon, and they are level, I think 5 at this point, and they're going to fight a level 7 black dragon, and they know they're supposed to do this thing, and they get stuck in the forest on the way there in the swamp, and they run into some awakened trees. This is supposed to be a quick kind of way to trip them up, but they foolhardily split up instead of staying together, and one tree just manages to whack the wizard dead and literally burn through the death saves, and the dragon battle hasn't even started yet. And I'm sitting there as a dungeon master going, I didn't need you to die right now. I wasn't even trying to be cruel. So now I get where you're coming from. And at the same time, while I think everyone does level the same criticism, or not criticism, but frustration, we have to admit that because it's so simple, it's easy to get into, and it does work for the kind of general fantasy narrative driven play that you might want to go with before you start wetting your toes in other systems.
My advice for 5e when you run into that where you're like, this was supposed to be challenging, damn it. You control the map and the terrain.
Right.
That's kind of the third wheel that the 5e designers for some reason did not talk about enough. Like they one of the things that we did in the level up books is the world itself gets actions.
Right.
The GM can choose like, okay, you're fighting in a swamp.
Yeah.
Like on initiative count 20, the world is going to have some action where like, a tree falls or a vine or whatever, the gas bubble, but something happens so that I can still have a little bit of extra push and sway. So like if I need to inhibit the monsters in some way because you're getting mobbed by this tree, or if I need to inhibit you in some way because god damn it, there's that like third extra option that for some reason the was. I mean, I guess they had a lot going on. They wanted to keep things, whatever. Remember that you control the train in situations like that.
Right. And I think, and that's the beauty of, I guess, third party editions, right? Because there's just so many ways we can then mod on top of it, and I'm okay with this. I'm okay with the fact that the core is what it is, but then there's just so much awesome stuff outside that I can use to improve upon my own experience. And because also every table will want different things. Some people might not want, to even feel challenged. They might just want to feel like they get to be mythic in 5e, and that's a very different game to be running. But that does.
My lawyer actually got really mad because he's like, "Oh, I love D&D," and I was like, "Sure, you can play my D&D game." And he was like, "This is not D&D," and I was like, "Okay, buddy, hold on." He's like, "No, my dad used to run D&D for me. It was very different." I was like, "Okay, I'm not your dad.
Yeah,
I'm more of like the impartial god."
yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah, rah, rah, rah." And I got him into another game recently where we're just like playing like Disenchantment, like the cartoon, basically. And he's like, "This is amazing." I'm like, "Good. This is the one. This is for you, Mark. This is the right way for you to play D&D." Yeah.
Right. No, definitely. I think that's also about how it gets marketed, and then the reality sometimes doesn't quite sync up. But that's a whole different conversation. Speaking about the value of third party organizations, can you talk to me about the difficulties they face in the market scene as it's evolving? In terms of, say, you who's creating advanced 5e, or other people creating their own campaign settings, what are some difficulties we might see going forwards? And also on the other side, what are some bonuses, like pros, that we might be see going forward, right?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a really it's a strange time. So, next year they're releasing, D&D 5.5e, I think is the expectation, right? WotC's going to update 5th edition. I Okay, so let's start adding some context here. D&D has about like 75% of the market share, 70%. It's some absurd number. And then like I think behind them is like Chaosium and Modifius and Paizo each have a single digit sliver. And then there's the rest of us. So like so goes the leader, so goes the marketplace. WotC is setting up to make their own virtual tabletop, and I don't. I would love to see their agreement with Drive-Thru RPG and see like what their like closeout walkaway clause is. Because my expectation is WotC is going to be like, well, we're making our own virtual tabletop. We're just going to make this the one-stop D&D shop. This is where you come to get your D&D books, your D&D PDFs, your D&D adventure modules are like ready on our virtual tabletop. All of it, come here. This is the place. So I think they're going to shut DMs Guild down. And I'm not totally sure if they're going to try to do another. More context. When 3rd edition came out forever ago, when I was a child, in the before times.
I wasn't born then.
Oh Christ. They released it with the open gaming license, the very first open gaming license. And people were like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm going to make books." And people did make books. Made a lot of books. They made so many books that WotC was like, "Shit, we need to be making a ton of books so people remember like who's making the books." And they released 2 hardcovers a month, which is way too many. And a lot of them were cool and good, but it bloated the system and created a lot of problems. So then when 4th edition comes around, like, okay, we don't want to do this again. We're going to make the gaming system license. To get access to the gaming system license, initially, you have to pay us thousands of dollars, which obviously a lot of people were like, whoa, no. And fourth edition had a lot of other problems aside that there was like a huge expectation from everybody because we all love third edition, right? So we
Yeah.
all pre-ordered fourth edition, so
Right.
much so that they had to do a second
Yeah.
print run before even releasing the first print run,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you can't sell a fourth edition player's handbook now for $1. And it was designed to like I've heard this from WotC staff. They were like told specifically, like, make something that will bring in the EverQuest massive multiplayer online RPG people, right? All the Warcraft players, all the EverQuest players, we want them.
Mm.
So they made a good game. Like fourth edition, if they had called it the Gauntlet RPG, fucking bananas. It would have gone so well.
Yeah.
But they called it D&D, and that's not quite what it feels like, and that's because they were told to make something kind of different. So anyway, all that goes down with fourth edition, and then fifth edition rolls out, and 1 month goes in, no OGL. Fifth edition, 2 months, 3 months after it's come out, no OGL. And like all the other people like me were making third-party content. Like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Like, we want to make fifth edition books. And so then Frog God Games, which is like old school players, they've been around for a long time. Whole bunch of lawyers, like they literally are all just lawyers. We're like, screw it, we're making a fifth edition book. We're running a Kickstarter for it. And if you guys don't release an OGL by the time we publish this book, we'll use legacy definitions because you're still calling fighters fighters. And in the third edition OGL, you establish that fighter is a term we can refer to.
Yeah.
And then we get the SRD, right? The fifth edition SRD. And the fifth edition SRD has gotten one update, I want to say maybe a year after it came out. When it was like, I think they changed the wording for resistance to magical weapon attacks or something like that.
Sure.
It's really small. But like it doesn't include all of the core fifth edition rules. It does not include anything after the core. So nothing from Xanathar's, nothing from Tasha's, nothing from any of the adventures, none of that. It's just like, here's magic missile, here's one archetype for each class, here's the grappler feat, no other feats, just the grappler feat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what you can use to make third-party content. That's what we're all using. But I'm very skeptical that we're going to get a sixth edition or whatever the next one is, whenever they roll their VTT.
Right.
I don't think there's going to be an OGL with that.
Right.
But it's cool because Level Up Advanced 5th Edition is around. It has an OGL.
So what that means is essentially you, or at least you're perceiving right now, just based on previous trends, that the WotC will make it a kind of online, completely
One-stop shop.
One-stop shop, and then for the rest of us who might want to create third-party content, we'll have to just do it through drive-through maybe.
No, you'll have to do it on their one-stop shop.
Right.
Like I don't think there will be 6th edition OGL products on drive.
Right. So they'll just. But does that mean they change the OGL for 5th edition so that it has to be sold on their site?
No, so like you can refer to rules from 5th edition on the DM's Guild.
Right.
Any rule.
Yeah.
Like if it's from Tasha's, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But your product can only appear on DM's Guild because everything that appears on DM's Guild is essentially handed over as property to WotC. You retain 2 rights. One of them is to change the price of your product, and the other is to pull your product from the marketplace. But you can't ever like fully remove it from the marketplace. It belongs to WotC as soon as you put it there. So like if So you're asking about the OGL products on there. So yeah, like I think they'll still probably have people making stuff for them, like as a third party thing, but it'll only be on their marketplace. It might be better than the 50% cut they have now, because like DM's Guild takes 50%. Otherwise, if you're using drive-through RPGs, 35%. And if they cut drive-through RPG out, maybe they offer people, you can publish here and we'll just take 30%. But I doubt it, because they know that they can get 50% from people.
Right.
If anything, I think they're probably going to say we're going to keep 60% of whatever you make in our one-stop shop,
right,
and you can keep the other 40%.
How does that then work with say Level Up? Because you're saying that Level Up has its own OGL, which means I can go create stuff. But is Level Up then not referring to anything on the side of WotC? So that is it its own?
We include them in our chapter 15, which is what you have to do for any book that you. So like if for instance, they're all over there.
Yeah.
But in all my books where I refer to like say Miss Kuma Adventure book, right? There's a bunch of them. I think like 11. And in each one of them, they have a chapter 15 at the end, the OGL. And in the chapter 15, I have to include Mists of Akuma because like I'm pulling characters and stuff from the Mists of Akuma book. So I think in our SRD we refer to the 5th edition SRD, but that's it.
Right.
Because that's the only thing we can refer to legally, right?
Right. And then everything else is just custom anyway. So you created it. WotC doesn't need to really claim it. Right. I think this is one of those things that once you understand it, it's a lot easier to navigate. But for most people, it can initially be very intimidating because you see the
And
OGL. Yeah.
When my lawyer read the OGL, he
Yeah.
laughed his ass off.
Right.
It's not a very apparently it's not a very good legal document.
Right.
And there's never been any challenges for the OGL either, right?
Yeah.
There was one where what about 2 years ago, a guy named who goes by Frylock, but he creates these like little like short printable cards with monster stats on them, right? Just like for free on his website. And he includes all the monsters from the monster manual. And Watsy was like, hey, can't do that, take it down. And he was like, I'm a lawyer, fuck you, here's why. And he ended up winning, like they didn't want to take him to court. And I think that that's because they know there's not a lot of strong legal ground in the OGL because it's, it's not an official. It was the first document of its kind. Let's put it that way.
Right.
It was like we're going to make a custom Creative Commons license.
Right.
And those are very complicated to make. And while certainly a fine endeavor, I think maybe they were a little under-equipped for it.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna transition away us away from the OGL discussion because I think for most listeners they've already capped up on their understanding of this. Let's get back to the actual creating side of things. We talked about a mechanic that you are really proud of. What's a mechanic you just don't care for?
Oh, okay. So in and I don't want to bomb them, but in Conan D20, you every time you roll something, you roll twice.
Okay.
And if you roll like a natural 1, I think it is, the DM gets a Doom counter. Right. And then Doom counters are used for like big boss battles. What happened was I just became terrified of rolling the dice at all. I was like, well, shit, can I climb this without rolling the dice? And Jim was like, no. It's like, okay, well, can I walk around it? Because, like, I don't want to give you any more curse counters because, good lord, dude, you have 6 of them.
Yeah.
Like, every time I roll, I'm fucking myself.
Yeah.
So in that instance, and it's not that I hate the mechanics so much, right? So, like, if that were in a horror game where I'm supposed to be feeling fear, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. But in Conan, where I'm supposed to be like feeling like a badass, no, that is not what that does.
Right.
And they use that in other games. Like I understand they use it in Star Trek in some way or another. So I would say that that's a dubious mechanic. It's a mechanic that I find dubious, and in that particular instance in Conan, it is not very well used.
Is it in Star Trek that if you're a red shirt, you have to roll twice and you get cursed? Because that sounds like it.
That sounds like it's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other one I didn't like was the Force die in Edge of the Empire, because I feel like the way that I play and most of the games I play and the ones that where I run, I'm like an impartial computer. I try to like just be there to facilitate the game, and you do whatever it is you do. Like it's a sandbox, go nuts. And with the Force die and that kind of approach, it's just aggressive. It just gets really aggressive, and the GM and the party start sort of like fighting each other with the Force die.
How does the Force die work? How does it work?
Somebody says they're going to use it, and then they add a bonus, and then that adds a use for I think the GM or something like that.
Right.
And like they each tally up sides, and like the more it gets used, the more the other side gets to use it, and then the more the other side gets to use it, and it just yeah.
That sounds like
I'm sure in the right hands and the right approach, it's very nice, but with my people, it did not work out.
Right. I can definitely see people kind of just stacking it up and it becoming a bit competitive without intending it to be, like between the GM and the player.
Yeah. You want this thing to happen, and the GM wants this thing to happen, and now you have this thing to fight over to try to get that.
Yeah. I don't think that's the role for the GM to fulfill anyway. Fair enough. Okay, so we talked about how WotC and 5e are going in this direction. There's Paizo and Pathfinder. What's a system apart from these that you're a big fan of, and you might want to create something for in the future?
Oh, that's a question. I mean, it would be unfair to say Shadowrun because I don't actually like the Shadowrun system so much. That's kind of the reason we made Hypercore, is because Shadowrun breaks itself so quickly. The setting for Shadowrun is the cool part. System that I really like that I want to make something for that I haven't already made. That's a really hard question. You didn't ask me this question last night. I'm trying to remember. I really want to make something for. I mean, I I can't think of a system that I would want to make something for. I can think of stuff that I would want to make systems for.
Tell me
Like
about
if I
that.
got the Record of Lodoss War license or the Mega Man license, uh, or even the Street Fighter license.
Hmm.
I could definitely see like whole game systems I would want to make. I actually
Really?
have a prototype Mega Man RPG in the can somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I can think of stuff where I would want to just start from scratch and be like, how do we make Mega Man work for multiple people and not as like a platforming game?
Right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I can't think of anything where I'm like, man, I really want to do that I haven't like just done.
Right. So
Like
what's
Warhammer books for Fantasy Flight, I love those to death. I got to work on those.
yeah.
I got to work on the new Warhammer 4 books. Like, yeah.
So what is something if there isn't anything that you're particularly like, oh, I want to do that, then what is something upcoming that you are excited for that you are doing?
Oh, just saw something this morning where I was excited. I think it's Chaosium's doing like a Victorian England Cthulhu thing.
That sounds about
Was it
right. Yeah.
Victorian England? Yeah. Was that announced just yesterday?
I
Yeah.
don't
I
know.
saw that and I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay, Lloyd, nice.
Yeah.
So I'll probably check that out on it. And then I have some projects coming up. Like after I finish the epic things, um, got the first 3 stretch goal adventures out. There's one more to go. It's about like fighting whole cities at once. It's great. I'm doing a 100 Acre Hell, which is like corrupted Winnie the Pooh. I'm
Yeah.
very excited about that.
Please tell me a
My
bit more about
artist.
that because I know what it is, but I think the audience will get a kick out of it. Tell me a bit about
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
So, and I actually it's already on my blog. If you want to go check it out, there's a
Yeah.
free version of it. The one that's going to go through Kickstarter will be much nicer. But and I play tested this too. So basically, one player plays Winnie the Pooh, and
No,
you're
sorry.
like
Yeah. There.
your demonic
Yeah.
honeypot,
Yeah.
which just magically keeps filling with honey, suddenly stops,
Mm.
and so you have to go out and figure out what the problem is and like how to refill your talking terrible horrible abyss honeypot.
Mm.
And everybody else is all corrupted. Like Rabbit's gone crazy. I can't use Tigger, unfortunately, because Tigger does not enter the public domain for another like 2 or 3 years.
Mm.
We might replace him with Puss in Boots.
Mm.
Find out. Um, Owl has become a cannibal. Christopher Robin obviously is missing. As soon as he goes missing, Hell moves into the 100 Acre Woods. So,
Right.
and then Kanga's got his own gang.
Right.
And then his mom is like a recovered alcoholic addict who has found God and is like
Right.
the only like good character that you're available. Oh, Eeyore's filled with horrible like cosmic horrors.
Oh no.
Oh,
Poor guy can't catch
yeah.
a break.
He's a fleshy monstrosity. It's pretty great. Yeah.
I,
So I'm excited about that one.
speaking of like subverting existing texts, we were talking about comedy and how it's about immersion. Can you go back to that and tell me a bit more about how that works, and also how to bring comedy to your table?
Sure. So this is from like our first batch recording, so I'm gonna roll back a little bit.
Yeah.
The first like one of the first, if not the first, academic study on comedy was if I'm no, I think I gave you the wrong name. It wasn't Sartre. It was some French guy with an R name. I can't remember it now. I did this in college, which is over like 15 years ago for me now. But no, I'm just not gonna remember it. Anyway, Rabelais. His name was Rabelais.
Okay.
Rabelais. Anyway, his first, the first earliest study of comedy was not just about comedy; it was also about shit. Because, like, in addition to being super important to medieval life, and this guy was writing this in the early Renaissance, it's inherent to comedy because we find inversions funny. People laugh at farts because noise comes out of your mouth, not out of your behind.
Yeah.
And it's really that simple and incredibly frustrating because like
Yeah.
it's hard to be funny and to write funny shit.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately, that's what a lot of comedy ends up being:
Mhm.
just clever inversions.
Mhm.
And bringing comedy to your table is like super difficult. I do have a project that is on Kickstarter now until the 14th. It's called Staged Heroism.
Mhm.
It's like a Venture Brothers RPG. That's specifically actually why we made it. So if you are familiar with Venture Brothers, go check it out. You're gonna love it. But that's like, and that's a comedy RPG. You're supposed to be laughing a lot, and bringing comedy to the table is kind of difficult because like comedy's hard, first of all, and you gotta like get people in the mood. You got to get the vibe going. And once you like start getting people laughing, it'll be easier to keep the laughs going. But yeah, you gotta set stuff up to be that way and get people in the right attitude and mode. So like laughs during a D&D game happen, but they aren't every 10 minutes, right? You might get like one really good like nut crusher, but usually it's just a couple good jokes a game. In a comedy RPG, you should be laughing every like 5, 10 minutes. Um, and I think that's what we achieved with Stage Heroism. But it took a lot of playtesting to get there, and also you need to have the right group. It's not always going to work. You got a lot of people who are angry if there's like a lot of drama going on or something like that, or if somebody's just having like a horrible week
Yeah.
and they're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
No, a game can't change that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
head in there with a good attitude and
Speaking of comedy, and then there's also the aspect of villains, because you've talked before about how just playing villains that are memorable is in itself a kind of skill set, and I know you're pretty good at it. So tell me what makes good villains.
sure. I think how I broke it down last night was there's three ways that I think you can go about it. One, pour charisma into it, which I call the Christoph Waltz method. If you do not have ample charisma to just pour into it, then there are two other ways to go about it. One is to make the villain relatable, right? So like what they're doing in their eyes is a good thing, and maybe what they're doing in the eyes of many is a good thing. It's just not in the eyes of the party. It's a good thing. But like having a guy who's just dastardly mustache twisting evil for the sake of being evil, hard to relate to, hard to care about. If you're trying to avenge your slain family and also do this other good thing that will help some people but hurt others, well now we have a moral and ethical argument that the
Right.
party might have to grapple with, and that's relatable. That makes the villain stick. And then the third way, and this is also very difficult to do, especially if you have people who are vindictive, and almost all gamers I know are, is to have a recurring villain. So we see the villain, we see them again, they establish a history. Once that history is established, the relationship begins between them and the party, or the individuals in the party. And the players will have a better time remembering and caring about that villain.
Right. I think that's definitely a takeaway is recurring and relatable, because that's a lot easier to accomplish than charismatic. Which is, I feel like when I'm playing Strahd, that's probably when I'm trying to be my most charismatic, because he just oozes that kind of over the top, really, at least the way I play him, is over the top, campy, kind of suaveness, and that works in setting up the fact that at the end of the day, he's a really murderous, evil guy. Um, and that balance is interesting to play around with. Um, just going back a bit, just with we were talking about how the landscape's changing dramatically, and we talked about some of the issues we're going to be facing. What are some of the good things that we can expect, especially now with more digital spaces, a bigger market share, and like not market share, but like more people in the market?
Yeah.
What are some changes you're looking forward to, or and also what are some practices you hope to see like newcomers take up?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's more people gaming and playing, which is just great. Because like, the more people are playing, the more money's in the game, the more people who can like do what I do as a full time thing and support themselves. That's good. Um, good things. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of I am not an optimist,
Mm.
so that's a tough question for me. Um, I I look forward to more voices, I guess. I guess that's the one thing I could definitely say for sure is happening and is good. If there's more voices in there, it's not just a ton of people who look like me.
Yeah,
It's like eventually the well goes dry, folks.
yeah.
Um, so I like that. That's cool, and it's fun to see new people get into the game and like what they bring to it. Um, hmm. I Yeah, I don't know. That's all I really got. Well,
I
like I said, I'm not a happy person.
I feel you. But in fact, it's true that you say about not only just the diversity of voices, but the number of voices increasing, because I think it does mean that we get entirely new experiences in the game. I'm curious, have you come across any other work by anyone else that brings a perspective or a voice you go like, oh, that's new. I liked playing that. That was interesting to explore.
Um, yeah, actually, when we were doing the recruiting for Level Up, there was one recruit where boss is like, I want to hire this person, and I looked at her stuff and I was like, look, okay, well, I mean, this is cool stuff. She wrote some interesting things in here, but like the mechanics are not very good, and like her English is a little wanting. And he fought me on it. And hold on one second.
Yeah.
My dog was misbehaving. All right. Yeah, he fought me on it, and you know what? To his credit, he was right. She was a great hire. I think her pen name is Sen HHS.
Okay.
Sen.H.H.S. But you'll see her stuff in WotC now and Paizo and a bunch of places. And it's what I would say is the defining thing about it that like I that won me over was that there's a sensibility to it
Mm.
where it's just like he takes fantastical stuff and makes it up presents it in a way where it doesn't feel super fantastical, right? The feeling of its presentation is natural while it remains fantastical,
Mm.
which is a really unique quality, and like kudos to you, Sen. You're killing it with that. Um and then who else has really impressed me? Well, Lloyd's not a new voice. Lloyd's an old voice. But he does really good. Lloyd Yan, who I believe is a Chaosium or Motif, one of those ones. I think it's Chaosium because they're Britain. Anyway, he turned in some of the sloppiest copy that I've ever gotten from actually no, the sloppiest copy I've ever gotten from a professional game designer. No contest. Not the sloppiest copy I've ever gotten.
Mm.
In the running for the sloppiest copy I've ever gotten,
Sure.
but the sloppiest ever gotten from a professional game designer.
Right.
That said, it was also really good.
Yeah.
It took me like 2 or 3 hours to clean it up.
Yeah.
By the time I was done, I was like, son of a bitch.
Yeah.
This is really good. I'm going to have to hire him for the rest of it.
Yeah.
Like,
Fair
please
enough.
get better at turning in copy. Like, remember to do stuff. Like, let me make you look good, dude. Don't make me do so much work. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, Lloyd turns in good stuff. But he's not new. He's not new.
No, fair enough.
Yvonne is new. Or I'm sorry, Sen is new.
Mm. Are there any campaign settings that have come out outside that you were, maybe even official stuff, but unofficial as well, that you were like, hey, this is really cool. I like the world that you've created.
Oh, the C
Oh,
uh
Sina Una, is that the one you're talking about?
Sina Una, yes.
Yes.
Sina Una was dope as hell.
Yeah.
Um
We were all pretty impressed by that one. I think they really knocked it out of the park there. I think everyone was just generally like, damn, that's cool. I think
yeah.
there's definitely a lot of hunger for, um, I would say, literally anything except European fantasy at this point. And deeply, I guess, culturally entrenched, because not it's not just about the mythology, but like culturally entrenched material. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's actually a really a thing that I end up struggling with a lot.
Yeah.
So D&D is a game of Western fantasy,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you this very strongly. Like we looked for other things to call the cleric or druid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's nothing else to
Yeah.
call the cleric or druid.
Right.
No matter what you're going to end up picking, you're basically picking the same
Hmm.
thing. Is
Yeah.
that there's no non-West
Yeah.
term for it.
Right.
Um, and that brings up this other thing. So, like, should there be such a thing as Eastern fantasy?
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm not ready. I think ultimately that yes, there should be, in the same way that there should be British fantasy, while there is also Western fantasy, and
Right.
like German fantasy, and Italian fantasy, and Taiwanese fantasy, and Singapore fantasy, and
Sure.
they should all have their own thing, but there can still also be Western fantasy and Eastern fantasy. And there's this like not unjustified um predication movement, whatever, to like not have Eastern fantasy and only have like Japanese fantasy or Chinese fantasy, this or that.
Right.
And while I understand it and it makes a lot of sense, we don't want to just like glom everyone together and lose culture. That's horrible. Would we have D&D if there was only British fantasy?
Right.
Would we even be having this discussion
Right.
if Western fantasy wasn't this big mashed up genre
Right.
that we all value and clearly like?
Yeah.
Like,
I think the difference is that it kind of I can see where you're coming from, and I get
the difference is that white people are the ones who made Western fantasy and are doing this all of that stuff. I get what's going on. It's
yeah.
just I struggle with it a lot. Is my point.
No, I get where you're coming from, because even for me, hell, like you say you struggle, but even say if I'm trying to write, say, just Indian fantasy. In fact, I'm talking with the guys who are creating Emerald Temple is about writing some stuff for them about like just Indian inspired lore and world building. And the first conversation, I was like, okay, listen, I can bring you a perspective from one part of this continent, from one part of the history. There is just a whole other wealth out there that you'll have to, because not only have so many different rulers come and ruled here, but within the kind of, even just say if you go back three millennia and say look at the warring kingdoms within, they were vastly different, right? And to kind of be like, okay, vaguely they're all more or less doing the same thing, is just incredibly incorrect, and also just not fun. It really takes away like the nuance and fascination with it. Um, and so, yeah, I completely get it, because on one side you want to be like, yeah, I created an Indian fantasy, and at the same time you're like, yeah, but it comes with like a lot of subsections that really need to do it justice. In fact, this is one of the things that I think even a lot of Indians don't realize it. But Hinduism, right, um, is a concept that only really came into being post the arrival of the British. So it's weird, because basically what you have is a variety of texts, right? Religious texts and sacred texts, and so Vedic and all
It
of this.
was like not. It wasn't all organized under one umbrella.
It wasn't, right. It was just different, massively different
And the
interpretation.
British were just like, it's Hindu.
Yeah, it
No.
wasn't even just like it's Hindu. It's more that because so there was a point, there was a turning point where they were like, okay, we're going to stop touching this whole religious pot, because it clearly, like, one of the reasons why the British were able to so successfully rule for 200 years is because they literally had a policy of like not interfering with religious sentiment. So they were like, because they realized at one point, this is the Sepoy mutiny. It's one of the first and most infamous mutinies that ever happened. It's literally what happened is they had like a bunch of soldiers, Indian soldiers, biting off cartridges that had pig fat or cow fat on them, and that was a big no-no. And there was just, they weren't listening to the fact that it went against their religious beliefs, right? And so all of these people were grouped up into their same caste or same religious community, and so they all banded together and were like, okay, we're going to go revolt. And there's a whole, I mean, obviously the British sent in a galley and bombed the shit out of it and got it done. But that was a moment where they were like, okay, we will separate them all up into different castes and religion and faith, and then we will not interfere and let them practice it within their own little compartments. Which is why there are so many. And this doesn't also there's, mind you, there's also a history of Mughal rule, and Hindu Muslim sentiments have been a whole different thing on its own. So I'm not saying that it's not like we didn't have other issues before that, but
The whole subcontinent, man.
yeah, exactly. But essentially, Hinduism as a term and as a idea of like one coherent belief system with one set of how it should be interpreted is fairly recent. And if you go back further, it kind of gets broken up into Vaishnavism, Shivaism, and then like different gods and
I
different.
got just far enough to get a sense of that, and then I was like, oh god, no.
Yeah,
That's got to be an insane rabbit hole.
yeah, and like even now, what will happen is popular media will focus on like North Indian representation of Hinduism, and it will completely disregard. Because Bollywood is somewhat North Indian based. Mumbai is like mostly just catering to north half of India, and South India has its own film industry, and so we tend to just pretend that they don't really exist unless we're using them as a trope. It's like New York making a film and it's going to make a joke about the Bible Belt, right? It's just going to
Sure.
reduce it into a trope, and that's not quite right because there's clearly a lot going on over there. That's a vague estimation of what I'm trying to say. And the South does kind of the same, where they kind of try to go, well, you guys ignore us, we'll ignore you, and they do the same thing in return. But also, what's crazy is that how they access a lot of this religion is also different. There are parts in the Northeast that worship the very beings that we demonize. So that's a massively different take on the same book, right? It's not
Like, no,
yeah.
is it like literally opposite sides?
Yeah, it's so. For example, right, and there's also the other thing is one of the things that happened with, and I'm sorry, I'm turning this into me talking now, but um, what happened, and I've been reading about this as well because it's not really taught to us, right? So it's self-learned. But what happened was, one of the things that happens is you got to find corollaries between your own faith and the faith you're kind of taking over, right? Like the Romans did. The Romans would go conquer someone and be like, "You have your gods, but they're more or less our god, and this is how they."
Dionysus.
Yeah, good. Just fit him in, right? Big deal. When you look up the Wikipedia article on Narc, right? It says, oh, this is like the Indian version of hell. And that's what the Wikipedia article says. And the thing is, I had this conversation with someone in India, and I was like, we don't have a hell because hell is supposed to be a permanent place of punishment where sinners go who have rejected God. And Narc is a place where you go to pay penance and then you get rebirth. You are not supposed to be there indefinitely, and you're not supposed to recognize the brightnesses of God. You're just supposed to.
I think that's how the Buddhist hells work too. There's like
Yeah,
1,000 Buddhist hells, and you
yeah.
go through them.
Yeah, there's and that Buddhism was or the founding father of Buddhism, Gautam Buddha, is an Indian
Yeah.
prince. So obviously,
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities there, right? And that's the other thing is there are parts of Hinduism that are like you can be atheist and you can be Hindu, right? And you can be Buddhist and you can be Hindu because yeah,
Okay, because I guess because it's just like the whole belief system. So you just pick a couple of things. They're not
it's
necessarily about gods, and you're like, I'm
yeah,
down with
because
that.
we separate
Okay.
separate the entity of karma, which is your actions, from your dharma, which is your faith. And dharma speaks to you staying true to your religious, or rather your spiritual duties, and karma speaks to your kind of the human part of your life, right? And the Mahabharata is actually a big story that actually really is about this conflict, because that infamous quote by um, the guy who said, "Now I've become," he quoted Krishna. He's like, "I've become death, destroyer of worlds." That whole speech is about Arjun, who is a Pandava. He's a prince.
Arjun, yeah, I know Arjun.
Yeah,
Prince Arjun, yeah.
and he's about to start the war with, or lead the war against the Kauravas, which are his cousins. And his religious duty says you don't go against your your own family. That's just wrong. But his righteous duty speaks that, well, they have wronged us, and they are conquerors we do not like, so we must do this thing because that's the right thing to do. And God himself comes and goes, you must make a choice, and either way it's about knowing your karma and knowing your dharma. But you get how this is entirely different from like other kind of Abrahamic.
In Christianity, if you do bad, like you're going to hell. Oh,
Right.
Did you accept Jesus? Because we're the friendly ones.
Yeah. And that's a very different take. And so I'm not saying that it's unfair, but that's kind of what happened is the British came, and before that the Mughals came, and there was a lot of conflict, and obviously that happens, right? I'm not here to, because I don't want to get into the whole thing of like, oh, these rulers destroyed us, but it's one of the things that happened over 200 years of British rule and many years of Mughal rule before that, that a lot of the faith changed and how it is practiced. And so nowadays, a lot of people practice it, but without even realizing that they're already practicing a morphed version of what was, but while still trying to call it like the original. And it's deeply problematic, right? Because it's, again, like casteism is so deeply entrenched in our system, but casteism also was made to shine through British rule, because it's great if you, as your own society, stratify your people and then push others down, right? It's great because then the British are like, okay, we'll control the Brahmins control the Kshatriyas control these guys, and they'll control the Shudras, and that way we just need a bunch of administrators. England didn't need to have a massive population controlling India; they just needed a bunch of clerks doing it for them. And so you have this massive stratification, and what's crazy is that when you look at books like Ramayana and Mahabharata, they're actually biting, inciting critiques of casteism and classism, and how treating people shit is usually going to lead to more problems in your life, and how you should generally try to be good people because that matters more than like if you did your, if you were treated respectfully by the whatever, right? Anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but yeah, the point is that I completely get what you mean when you say that it's not that easy to write an Eastern fantasy, because it's not even that easy to write an Indian fantasy. And every time I start, I kind of get buckled under the idea that it's like whenever when I moved to South Africa, everyone would be like, "Hey, can you speak Indian?" And I'm like, "Which one of the 11 official languages? Sorry, 20 official languages would you like me to tap into? I can only
We
do
don't
two."
even have an official language.
Yeah,
We don't even have one here.
yeah.
There is no official language. Everything's in English, but it's not the official
Oh,
language.
I should, before all my Desis and Dragons friends come after me, India does not have a official language, or sorry, right, it doesn't have a national language. It recognizes.
Each place has its own. Okay.
Yeah, so you have, depending on the state, you will usually learn, and the school, and so the board of education you're working with, you learn a local language, you learn your own mother tongue maybe, and you learn English. So most people can speak some level of at least three languages, or two if nothing
That's,
else, right? And
that's kind of awesome.
yeah, but on official paperwork, you will at least always see English, and you will see Hindi, and in some other states they might mandate another language. But there is no national language, and this is a big heated debate because obviously there's this whole nationalistic movement to make Hindi the official language, and it comes at the cost of
A lot of
obviously.
nationalistic movements in India right now.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
so that's a whole different thing, right? And that's
Yeah,
again,
that's a whole different thing. Yeah.
and that's why
So I think my
yeah,
takeaway is like what we need is like Eastern people to make a definitive Eastern fantasy text
yeah,
and like work from there, because that's what we have with Dungeons and Dragons, right? We have a definitive Western fantasy
right,
text.
right,
Like even though paladins were very specifically Knights of Charlemagne, and
yeah,
that was it.
yeah, yeah,
There's a whole class of paladins in Western fantasy,
yeah,
and that's what
definitely.
we need. We need an Eastern fantasy that is
And I think
made by
I
not
think
white guys.
I think also the question, because most of the East can recognize the, like, one of the things that I noticed when I watched, I don't know if you saw Encanto, the
Not
film.
yet. I hear it's really good though.
It is really
I've
good,
got it on my list.
and Turning Red, both of these, what they really capture is this experience of a Asian, or not even Asian, because Encanto is actually South American, um, or Latin American, sorry. But it captures that kind of post-colonial community experience, which is so unique because almost every post-colonial state has joint families that were displaced that hold on together because they had a long time rebuilding as a nation, and so they're very kind of put together. And I guess like there's some definite aspects of like the South in US which line up in that kind of like big families are a thing, but in India in particular, right? Like big families, cousins, extended cousins are a big thing. And so I think everyone has a lot of these post-colonial identities that actually overlap. So maybe the fantasy that needs, or the book that needs to come out is actually from that point of view, because that's one that I think everyone will be able to tap into. And it's kind of what
Yeah.
I did with my own campaign setting at home is I started with a continent because I lived in South Africa for so long. I originally was like, okay, I'm going to base a continent that vaguely looks and feels like Africa. And then I'm going to have the players be the people who are like essentially the British arriving. Um, and then let them explore the implications of our being these kind of somewhat technologically advanced. I wouldn't say culturally advanced because that's a whole different boiling pot. Technologically advanced people coming and really messing around with things because it profits them, right? Um, yeah, and I think that's something that even though I was basing it on South Africa, a bunch of my Indian friends were like, "Yeah, we totally get what you're talking about, and this is very fascinating." So yeah. Anyway, we went off on over there,
We
but
did. I mean, it's just something that sits in my head a lot because, like,
yeah,
I want there to be Eastern fantasy. I want a low barrier. I want people to be like, oh, maybe instead of playing a knight, we should do something else.
yeah,
But I also don't want it to just be like samurai or the knights of the East, because,
yeah,
like, guys, it's a whole
yeah,
half of the fucking planet.
yeah,
Like,
and
just
that's
more.
yeah. No, definitely, I completely agree, and it is. I mean, if it sits in your head, it definitely sits in mine as well, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of the community in India and Desis and Dragons and just in TTRPGs in general is trying to figure out like how do we create our experience, how do we represent our experience, not even like try to make the the comprehensive book, but just represent these different and unique experiences that just don't get to be put into these books otherwise, right? So I get where you're coming from. It is if it helps. Yeah, it's not an easy challenge. We admit it as
I want both. I want Eastern fantasy and I want specific cultural
well.
fantasy.
Yeah,
But like, I don't. I feel very anxious
yeah,
anxious about like the discourse around it because
yeah,
there's definitely very little support for like larger genre broad fantasy and I feel like that's a thing that will be sad if we don't have.
yeah. No, definitely. Okay, just to wrap things up, we've talked a lot about creating campaign settings, getting into this industry, and kind of what you need to be bringing to the table. Some of the hurdles we see going forward, and also um, the upsides, possible upsides of the future of this industry. I just want to know is tell me to just wrap things up. What's a character that you have played that you're really memorable? Just tell me about that one, and we'll call it a day.
Okay. They don't play with this group anymore, but they
Yeah.
had this predication of killing my characters. And it wasn't like, like screw you, Mike. It was just like kind of what happened
Right.
kept happening because they were. So when we were starting a new game, I was like, what do you guys want me to play? Like instead of me just like make another character that you're mad about because he cares too much about killing giants. Can't keep a bag of giant ears. That makes you a serial killer. And I'm like, we're killing giants. It's about killing whatever. So they said make a paladin.
Yeah.
Make a paladin. And I was
Okay.
like, okay. Now make a lawful good paladin. Make a human lawful good paladin. It's fine. What lawful good human paladin will I enjoy playing? And I thought about it for a while, and I was like, Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon. I'm
Wow.
gonna play Murtaugh as a paladin. He's gonna be
Uh,
retiring from the City
oh my
Watch.
God.
It worked awesome. I
Yeah, I can
loved it
imagine.
so much. I have a post on my website about it,
Yeah.
about how I learned to love lawful good by playing as Captain Murtaugh.
Right.
And so did the rest of the party. That's the only character that I played that they did not want me to retire or kill.
Right.
They loved Murtaugh so much.
Right.
And he was so much fun to play because like he just wanted to retire and get his fishing boat and like get the like lesser officers to stop messing with his kids and to like kiss his wife and have dinner, and that was it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was one of the most enjoyable characters I've ever played. I
I
love
can see.
playing all of them. Like I love
Yeah.
playing my fake Southern priest. I love playing the serial killer halfling who hates giants. But like yeah, Murtaugh was the win.
Definitely. I can see the appeal of that. Before we wrap up, any other creators you want to shout out before we call it a day? People that everyone else should check out.
Yes, Sarah Brayfogle, who I think goes by DM Sarah,
Mhm.
is awesome. She did a lot of great work on Level Up. She did most of the equipment chapter, well, all the weapons and armor anyway.
Wow.
And she's going to be the narrator for the actual play Level Up game that's coming up. So if you like actual plays and you're interested in Level Up, you'll see Sarah doing that. Like I said earlier, Sen HHS,
Mhm.
she's a rising star, does great stuff. Lloyd Gann, also great stuff. Tiago Rosa, I've hired to do a lot of things. He does really good stuff. He did good stuff on the Epic line. What is Jocelyn? I think so. Jocelyn Gray slash X, like start with an X. Zeviat Tranian, I think is the other thing that she goes by. She does good work. She worked on Epic stuff too. Same for Peter Martin and Josh Gentry. Uh, yeah, I think that's Andrew Engelbright does really good work. Same, and I think I've already mentioned Zana Broadway,
Mhm.
who's amazing. And then recently, a guy I used to play with when I was much younger, who goes by Doctor Comics,
Mhm.
started working at WotC. Everything Jason Tondro does, Doctor Comics, Jason Tondro, awesome. Is incredible. He actually has a doctorate in comic books.
Nice.
Thesis paper was about like the Arthurian Round Table and its imagery in modern on comics and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's everything Jason does is amazing. I can't
Nice.
stress that enough. Um, yeah, yeah, and then there's a. I mean, I'm working. Yeah, yeah. There's another book from Paul Hughes, that guy I was talking about. He did a Monstrous Menagerie for Level Up, which is by all accounts a much better monster manual. And he's got a dungeon delving book that should be coming to Kickstarter in the next couple months. So keep an eye out for the Dungeon Delver's Guide.
Nice. Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us for this call. Those of you who have been listening, we actually recorded this call earlier in the day, and then my audio conked out. So we are actually doing it again. And Mike very kindly just basically appeared for 2 interviews. So thank you so much. And thank you for all your insights. And we'll chat soon. Okay.
Yeah, man, it was great. Thanks.